Hello and welcome back to the Planning and Placemaking Committee. Can I ask Committee Officer Jessica Gill to confirm attendance, please?
Thank you, Convener. For this afternoon's session, we have apologies from Bailey Ahern, who was substituting for Councillor Illingworth, Councillor Reid and Councillor Waters. All other members are present in the chambers with the exception of Councillor James, who is online. Can you confirm you're there, please? I see a thumbs up.
Hi, Jess. Yep, I'm there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's everyone here, Convener. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. We move on to local applications. This is a local application formation of a road widening and drainage works associated with planning application 21/01968 /FLM works at A9 and Shinnefoot B8062 Orterada. Introducing the short report is Mr. Panton. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Again, similar to the last application, a quick update for you. If you could please again substitute the words caravan park, this time in paragraph 44 to lodge park. So moving on to this item itself and associated with the last item, this application is also for works at the Shinnefoot Junction. During the assessment of the major application, it came to light that further road widening and drainage was needed to be included, hence the submission of this local application. As per the associated report of handling, in planning terms, this proposal is considered to be acceptable due to only being for the road widening and drainage. The granting of this permission would not undermine the legal agreement associated with the Orterada expansion. Next slide, please. Again, the location of this site is consistent with the previous item. Nevertheless, it is shown here for reference. Next slide, please. The final slide for this application shows the area of land under question. The green line shows the extent of the major planning application boundary, and the red line shows the area to be extended. As seen, it is really just a widening of the last application. Thank you, Convener. That concludes the presentation, and I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Sean. There are deputations for this application. I'll hand you over to the Deputy Convener to introduce the deputations. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Can I call Mr. McCafferty? Good afternoon, Mr. McCafferty. I'm aware that you were here this morning, so you've got 10 minutes for your deputation. I'll give you a prompt, 9 minutes to sum up for 10 minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, councillors. This is going to be a brief note, as it's slightly unusual in the sense that the report is a recommendation for approval. So I just wanted to add a bit of detail perhaps to the reasons given by Mr. Panton. As the report before you notes, this application is linked to the previous agenda item and is required because the need for the road widening and drainage works arose after the junction application was submitted during discussions about the junction application. As the report also notes, these related works will only be implemented if the junction is constructed and will be done as part of the same project. If I can turn to the recommendation, as has been mentioned previously, the planning policies against which this application had been assessed are the same as those against which the junction application was considered, and yet the recommendation here is one of approval because this application is considered to comply with development plan policy and industry standards. When you read the report of handling, it feels to me that more weight appears to be being put on the need for an improved access to the A9 and the planned junction at Shinnefoot than was given in the report on the junction itself. The officers consider that any local impacts are acceptable when considered in the grand scheme of things. Of course, the applicants agree with the officers on that. It's the approach the applicants ask you to adopt towards the junction application. The safety of the trunk road and the longer term economic opportunities which the junction will enable should be the key considerations in both applications, not just this one. In terms of objections, the report notes that there were 7 objections to this application. I confess that I've only been able to find 5 on the portal. A review of the representation shows that actually most are questioning the location and need for the Shinnerfoot Junction. That is, of course, a Scottish Government requirement, which has been carried forward in the development plan and development framework. These minor works, which are subject to this application before you, are necessary to enable the junction to be constructed. The works have been designed to industry standards and agreed with both Transport Scotland and the Council's road officers. As the report confirms, issues relating to noise, dust, construction traffic, etc. can be dealt with through conditions, as is the case in all development projects. In conclusion, convener, members, I commend the conclusion and recommendation for approval of the application. The proposal complies with TAPLAN 2016 and the adopted LDP2 2019. There are no relevant material considerations which would justify departing from the development plan in this case. I respectfully request that you grant consent for the application subject to the conditions set out in the report of handling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Are you okay about taking questions?
Yes.
There appears to be no questions, so you're free to go. I'll now hand you back to our convener.
Thank you. Can I ask members, are there any questions for officers? Councillor James, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, convener. A fairly simple one, really. Bearing in mind that we rejected the application for the other part to this application, I say the other part because although it was separate, is there any mileage in actually doing anything with this particular application? And if we're reminded to accept it, is the developer committed to doing this? Thank you.
I think we heard from the developer's representative that they wouldn't intend to implement this unless they also had the ability to implement the junction improvement works, if that takes your second question part. First part was, I would just say, you need to consider this application on its merits, as has been done in the report.
Just the only other thing I was going to say, and it's not in answering, it's not apropos of Councillor James' comments, but it may be appropriate to remind the committee that Councillor Crawford Reid this morning in his deputation, primarily on the first application, did say in passing that for his part he had no issues with the second paper, providing it in itself did not cause an increase in traffic. So that was his position this morning.
Are there any further questions? No. Can I ask for a motion? To give you the paper.
Just move the pipeline.
Have an agreement? Yes. Any amendments? No. Application is approved, subject to the conditions in the report of handling. We now move on to application 522, erection of 3 dwelling houses, 3 garages and associated works, land 30 metres northeast of Rantree, now Drum. And I believe it's Mr. Williamson that will speak to the report.
Thank you, convener. This application relates to a site adjacent to the A977 in Drum, which is acknowledged within the committee report has a considerable amount of history associated with it. With planning permission in principle having originally been granted back in April 2008, with subsequent renewals of permission in 2011 and 2014, resulting in the approval of matters application mirroring the submitted proposals you have before you today in June 2017. That application has subsequently expired. The site was also the scene of a fatal accident in 2012, which also resulted in a significant spillage of aviation fuel into the site, which has subsequently been cleared up. In this instance, full planning permission is sought for the erection of 3 dwelling houses and garages, as per the previously approved layout. On the site to the north of Rantry now, a single-storey detached dwelling house. I will now take the committee through a short presentation to detail the proposals. Next slide, please. First, this aerial extract shows the site outlined in red and its wider relationship with Crook of Devon to the west and Drum, within which the site is located, between the A977 to the north and the B9097 to the south. Next slide, please. We now see the proposed site plan with development utilising the existing access to the A977 adjacent to the existing bus stop at the west and north of the site. The layout shows the 3 dwellings internally facing towards the shared access and turning area. Next slide, please. The next plan shows the intended drainage layout with a foul connection to the existing public sewer and surface water drainage connecting to a suds pond to the southwest of plot 3. It ultimately discharges to the unnamed watercourse at the southern boundary of the site, which eventually feeds into the Gurney water approximately 800 metres to the southeast. Next slide, please. The elevations and plans now shown relate to the proposed 3-bedroom dwellings on plots 1 and 2, albeit with relatively minor variations between the two. External finishing materials include smooth white render, a cedral weatherboarding and natural slate roof. Next slide, please. This last plan shows the elevations and plans for the slightly larger dwelling to be located on plot 3, which comprises 4 bedrooms. Again, external finishing materials would mirror the neighbouring plots, and the overall height of the dwellings would be approximately 8 metres. I shall now share a few site photographs. Next slide, please. This aerial extract shows a slightly clearer image of the general pattern of development, with the application site in the centre. Next slide, please. Taken from the A977 to the north, this photo looks southeast and shows the existing bus stop and adjacent signalised crossing. Also evident is the bank of trees which run along the northeastern boundary of the site with the adjacent neighbour. Next slide, please. This next photo is taken from the roadside boundary wall, looking southeast into the site, and shows the slight undulation of the land beyond, as well as the neighbouring dwelling Rantry now. Next slide, please. We now see the view southwest, past the applicant's dwelling, showing the existing bus stop, access and adjacent dwellings beyond. Next slide, please. Thank you, convener. And that now concludes the presentation, and I'll leave members with the proposed site plan for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We do have deputations for this item. I'll now hand over to the Vice Convener to introduce the deputations. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. We have Mr. Moody, who's on the phone. Okay, and Mr. Bray. Okay, thank you. Could I maybe call on Mr. Morrison, who's in person? Sorry, Mr. Morrison, I've still got the phone. I'm sure you were here this morning, and I think you're aware of the 10 minutes deputation, and I'll give you a prompt at 9 minutes to allow you a minute to summarise, but just in your own time.
Oh, sorry, I pressed it. All right, thank you. I'm Alexander Morrison, owner of Drum House, which my wife and I have occupied since 1978. I therefore have knowledge of the drainage issues in the area, particularly affecting my land. I am also speaking on behalf of the residents of Cairdees, Broomhill Cottage and Broomhill Farm, who have objected to this planning application but are not able to attend today. Background to it, reference was made to the serious accident in 2012, which resulted in a major cleanup and large amounts of soil being removed and the field drains being disconnected to prevent pollution to the Gairney water. The soil has not been replaced, nor have the field drains been reconnected to date. This has caused considerable surface water flooding to my land from the direction of Rantry Now, which did not happen prior to the disconnection. In fact, in heavy weather, what resembled a stream could then be seen running from that direction into my field. Part of my land is low-lying, and previously one field was subject to some flooding in periods of heavy continuous rain, but to a much lesser extent, and not in the other fields. In order to alleviate some of the effects of this change, I put in new drainage on my boundary so that I would catch the water when it flowed through, and also in the adjacent field. Later, I also put in substantial additional drainage in the main field next to Cairdees house and yard. While these substantial works have helped to reduce the impact, there is still substantial flooding in the main field as well as Cairdees drive and very close to their garage, and on occasion encroaching into other gardens of houses further down the road. I did circulate to councillors photographs of recent flooding in my field and on Cairdees Drive when pumping was necessary to try and control and alleviate the flooding, which was also threatening other homes. A house further down the road had to have its garage pumped out by the fire brigade. The RAB report, which was the report for the developers on flood risk assessment, states flood depths in the site are typically 100 millimetres. The overland flow rates flow southeast and into the field boundary adjacent to the site. These flood depths are prior to any houses being built, which will inevitably increase flood risk. In fact, the report recommends the proposed dwellings set their finished floor level at least 700 millimetres above the highest surrounding ground level to mitigate the evolving surface water flood depths. It also recommends increasing the level of garden. The proposed SUD system will help to alleviate the effects of the development by transporting some of the water to an existing water course. The map that is shown there doesn't show where it goes eventually, this pipe, which takes it to an existing water course in the southeast, which is already prone to substantial flooding. The remaining excess from the development will exacerbate the surface water flooding from this area and cause more problems to the properties in the east, i.e. Drum and Cairdees and other people down the road. There is also real concern about continuing contamination in the area. An oil film can be seen on floodwater to the north of the site bordering on our Chatton house, spreading into the garden, which means that the occupants cannot let their children play at the bottom of their garden. In spite of requests, no on-site visit nor new study has been carried out since 2014 to establish the current situation and whether this development and associated works would impact on the problem. The report in 2014 said the hydrocarbon level was okay, but nothing has been done since then. And these neighbours have pointed out and objected and said that there is an oily film, but nobody's been to see it. Drainage issues downstream. The burn which this excess water coming from the Sud system flows through Cardee's ground and floods when there is a heavy rainfall. It then passes under the B9097 and also causes substantial flooding in the field downstream, which borders Broomhill Cottage, at times flooding their garden close to the house. Broomhill Farm has also been flooded in the past. The proposal shows that the outflow pipes from the Sud drainage system will discharge into this burn. And as I say, that map doesn't show the full extent of where the pipe goes. The increase in water discharge from this will increase the flooding in both Cairdee's land and downstream. The submission from the owners of Broomhill Cottage, Broomhill Farm and Cairdee's is that any additional water from 3 houses would increase the flood risk to their property, with Broomhill Cottage particularly at risk. I therefore submit that paragraphs 64, 65 and 67 in the report of handling are not accurate in stating that there is a neutral impact on flood risk in the local area. And it is also probable that current climate changes will cause increasing spells of very heavy rainfall, which will put further pressure on the Sud system. Indeed, the RAB report, one that was commissioned by the developers, recommends a detailed drainage strategy should be developed to address the evolving surface water flow paths and better manage surface water runoff, which reinforces our position. We are not against development in principle, but we request that no decision to allow this development is granted until appropriate studies and consultation with local residents have taken place and existing problems dealt with. We would like people to come and see what actually is happening on the ground and not rely on reports that are 10 years old. However, if you are minded to approve this application, I respectfully request that you undertake to compensate the landowners and householders for any associated costs associated with additional flooding. Thank you. I have a full copy of the map which the developer produced, and you should have it in your papers, I believe, which shows where the eventual outflow goes from the Sud system. If you would like me to give you, I'm quite happy to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Are you happy to accept questions?
Yes.
We have one in from Councillor Cuthbert.
Trying to stop me talking. Could we put up the first slide in the presentation just to show the flow of water? My question for you is which house you're talking about, or the houses you're talking about, Cairdee's and Broomhill Cottage and Farm, if you can point them out possibly on the plan when it comes up. It's the one with the river on it, or the flow. Just approximately with your stick if you want.
Cottage is, see where the end, where the triangle, where the orange end.
I'm following it. Could you point out where? Yeah, could you point out where Cairdee's is as well, possibly, please, just to get an idea.
There appears to be no further questions. You're free to go, Mr. Morrison. Have we managed to establish a connection? Can we call Mr. Moody?
Hi there, yes. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon,
there,
Mr.
can you hear-
Moody. Yep, I can hear you. You have 10 minutes to make your deputation. I'll interrupt after 9 minutes to prompt you to do your summary for a minute to up to the 10. And I will just start the clock whenever you start.
Sure. Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I actually live on the northern edge of the boundary in question in the house called the Gar, and I've lived there for nearly 3 years, so know the site rather well. Obviously, I've read the reports that have been issued in recent times, and I've come up with a number of points I just wanted to make clear on this one. I think importantly, the site does flood, especially in the top right-hand corner of the land. I'm not sure if you can see a picture of that. Even last week, there was large significant pools in the field, which show that it does obviously retain water. There was pictures actually shared on the presentation. It shows you the kind of foliage that grows, which is kind of like water weeds almost, because fundamentally in the winter in particular, the field becomes a bog because of the amount of water that's held in the particular field. The current owners use it for their sheep in the summer, but far less in the winter due to the state that the field gets into due to the water that is on site. I think another note is water does come off the roads. I think you have seen a picture again where the A977 is about a metre higher than the site itself. So obviously any excess water does kind of flow down and into the land also. I think another important point, and I think Sandy might have raised it when he talked to his point, there's been a number of developments in Drum in recent times. In the bottom right-hand corner of Drum, kind of Dornick House is kind of one of those sites. That's all been developed semi-recently, and has probably exacerbated the flooding in the area. The houses are all raised as intended for this development as well. So obviously all the water flows away from this new development and out towards the fields and the roads. The report says this has got a neutral rating, but it doesn't seem particularly neutral for everyone. I think it's actually positive for the site itself. The houses are going to be raised circa 700 millimetres above the current state because the land floods. The garden's also going to be 300 millimetres higher because again the land floods, and obviously with that rate of the garden, that will probably then subsequently mean water will inflow into my garden rather than the current site. So then therefore my garden gets to flood instead of theirs, which is fantastic. So I think actually it's positive for the site and negative for mine. But obviously, this is factored in. There's a sud system in place, and I think again it's been raised that excess water will flow down through the sud system and down to the B9097. And again, that's going to basically lock into an already complicated area in terms of water flowage, and subsequently across the road into the field where this water will flow, where Broomhill Cottage is, it will kind of exacerbate the flooding that's already present in that area. So I feel, maybe neutral overall, but positive for the site, but negative for everyone around it, which is the point I want to make here. Then the second point is in regard to the trees, which are on my property but border the site. There was a tree surgeon report done a number of years ago and identified 10 trees, 4 of which are over 20 metres high. I think importantly that the report is nearly 6 years old, and trees have grown again, and there's been no refresh of that data to kind of make sure that the kind of current impact constraint areas are accurate. The current plans for plot 2 does stray into one of the one of the tree restricted areas against the tree surgeon's advice. The ground levels are going to be altered per the report, again against the tree surgeon's advice. And due to the lay of the land, which you've probably seen that all that water that's going to kind of, flow, will flow down in towards my boundary. And it talks about, again, kind of building work, cement work, and all that excess water from those sort of things will impact the health of the trees as well. So we seem to be going against quite a number of factors that the tree surgeon has pointed out in the report, obviously paid by the current owners of the land, and therefore I could see there to be significant damage in the trees in the medium term, which could result in obviously trees either requiring to be remediated or to be chopped down. And then I think a few other very quick points to touch on. I'm not sure how my time is doing here, but the road is very busy, very fast. It is a 40-mile-an-hour road, but as you can imagine, in the evenings people go a lot faster along that road. And there was even a recent crash just up the road from that particular spot in recent times. And I think the oil point's been well made already, so I'm not going to cover that again. So I'll just pause there, conscious of time.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Are you happy to accept questions?
Yes, yeah, happy to, yeah.
Bear with me. Councillor James, do you have a question for Mr. Moody, or is this a legacy with the voice, the clarity in the previous deputation?
Yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. It was really directed at the previous deputation. I don't think the gentleman who's now deputising can answer. It was regarding drainage on the field, but perhaps I can ask officers.
Thank you. Mr. Moody, there doesn't appear to be any further questions, so you're free to go.
That's great, thank you.
Do we have Ms. Bray on the phone? Okay. Ms.
Hello,
Bray,
yes,
are you there?
I'm here.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi.
You have 10 minutes to make your deputation. I'll give you a prompt at 9 minutes to give you a minute to sum up, and I'll start the clock when you're ready to start your deputation.
Thank you. Well, I'm speaking today to raise concern and objection to the current planning application. And I know that there have been a number of points already raised, so I will try to cover other points that potentially haven't been raised yet. So first of all, as I pointed out in my written objections, the proposed site is currently above the height of other gardens, including my own. So I am in the house that is directly next to some of the adjacent sites or some of the adjacent properties. And I have provided photographic evidence of the flooding related to the site where the proposed development is. And that very clearly shows that it is uphill from my property. With the proposal to raise the level of the development site, as Mr. Moody rightly pointed out, this means additional flooding, both during and post-construction, is likely to occur in gardens, including my own. What I'd like to point out is that the lowest level of the proposed suds basin is actually higher than some of the gardens. The topographical map doesn't show all of the gardens in the area, but in fact, my garden, parts of my garden, are lower than the bottom of the suds basin, which is concerning considering the natural composition of the suds basin. Primarily what I would ask for is that there's a flood risk assessment that includes where the water currently drains to and not just the planning site itself. The flooding is of particular concern for me because I have a septic system in my garden, which would be at risk of backfilling into my house, a house which houses young children. And if I stay on that topic of wastewater septic system, I'd also like to point out the fact that the system includes a pipe which extends 40 meters or so into the proposed planning site, and that includes 12 soakaway trenches extending in a herringbone pattern. And the drawings and text in the application shows no regard and does not actually acknowledge this pipe or the soakaways, which concerns me because although the council does state in a recent report that they do not see that this is of material concern, it is very material for myself and my family, particularly because we could be left in quite a terrible situation with sewage water backfilling into the house should there be damage to the wastewater system or resulting from flooding. And then finally, on that topic of unhealthy living conditions, my last concern really that I'd like to raise is with regards to the visible oil residue that still exists on floodwaters in the fields surrounding the planning site and pooling in my garden. I understand from the reports, and as Mr. Morrison pointed out, the contamination was deemed to be trending towards acceptable levels, as the CEPA report stated. However, there have been no samples taken since 2014, and there doesn't seem to be any conclusive evidence to show that, in fact, the acceptable levels were actually reached, because the wording states
Will you be attempting to reconnect? Hello, Ms. Bray.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Ms. Bray. Yep, the signal dropped there, I'm afraid. Would you like to continue?
Sure. I was just finishing up. So the point I was getting to was that the CEPA report stated that it was trending towards acceptable levels, but there didn't seem to be any conclusive evidence that in fact it did reach acceptable levels in contamination. So I just wanted to conclude with that point.
Thank you. Are you willing to take questions?
Yes, thank you.
Give me a moment to see if we get any questions coming in. There doesn't appear to be any questions, and you're free to go.
Thank you.
I will now hand you back to the convener.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I ask members if they have any questions for officers? Bailey Williamson.
Yes, I was just seeking some clarity from officers regarding the SUD system. The SUD system is essentially there, I understand, to capture the water that's taken off the roofs and the hard standing. Is that correct? So it should have a capacity to capture that displacement. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was just going to start to say thank you, Bailey Williamson. Yes, ultimately that is the purpose of the SUDs, is to catch the surface water that arises from the development. But obviously we do have Gavin Bissett on the call as well, who can comment further.
Yes.
Gavin, would you like to expand?
Yep.
Go ahead,
no
Gavin.
problem, Councillor Massey. Yes, Mr. Williamson has just explained there. Yes, it is just to basically the purpose of SUDs are to manage the surface water that is generated on site. I suppose just for clarity, we are aware of wider surface water issues across the whole Drum and Crooked Devon sort of areas, but it's not the the sort of responsibility of any sort of development site to manage these wider existing issues. So the SUD system is designed only to manage surface water that is generated from the site, and that in turn results in a neutral impact. So in terms of the SUD system that has been designed for the site, we've basically got an attenuation basin. Now the purpose of that is to hold the water that's generated from the site, which will be routed there from a pipe network from the roofs and the roads, and that is then slowly discharged into a receiving water course. And the way that it's designed is to mimic the natural pre-developed state of the site. So that is how it sort of works to sort of have the neutral impact, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of conversation around flooding. Could the officers maybe sort of be more specific? Are we aware that there's flooding, or is it just excess water gathering in areas? Because we have had some pictures submitted, and personally I didn't really sort of say it was flooding. I would have said it was more just alluding to the drainage within our field drainage not really functioning properly. So I just wondered if you could just give us a bit more clarity on that. If you could, thank you.
Yes, no problem.
Gavin, you provide the detail after my basic comment here, if that's okay. But I think there's maybe two parts, Bailey McLaren. So what we need to look at is the site in itself, and then there's a wider situation as well. And I think maybe what you're talking about is surface water flooding or pluvial flooding rather than fluvial from a water course, and ponding, slow drainage or transfer of water across land. But Gavin will maybe be able to explain that in a lot more detail and clarity than I could.
Yeah, so we've seen the pictures that have been submitted by residents as part of the application process. So that was considered in our assessment, as well as our review of the flood risk assessment and drainage design. Now, our understanding is that there is a surface water issue in the area. The issue associated with the site seems to have arisen because of the removal of the topsoil and the capping of any field drainage. So therefore, it is going to be liable to ponding because there is no suitable drainage on the site itself. There is a wider issue, and the photos that have been submitted, as the objectors have sort of highlighted, are further downstream of the site. So there is a surface water flooding issue in the wider area, but we've not seen any evidence of a surface water flooding issue on the site itself. Now, with regards to this, the sort of impact of the development to that wider issue, as we've sort of said, there will be a suitable drainage system put in place through the form of a SUDS basin and a restricted discharge downstream, and that is how all developments are what all developments are required to do currently under current legislation to ensure that they don't have an increased risk of passing on flood risk downstream. With regards to climate change as well, we put in an allowance into any of the design calculations to account for that. So there is an additional allowance built into these designs to account for increased rainfall and flows that's generated in the future, as well as consideration of sort of surface water flow paths through the development as well, to ensure there's no adverse impact on the new development properties as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Cuthbert, I see you've got 3 questions. Can I ask that you do your first one first, and then we'll move on?
Thank you, convener. Maybe link the two together because they're both sort of similar. That's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
First question is to do with the direction of the outflow. My understanding is that it goes down to a burn that is at the bottom of the, is to the southeast of the property that's being proposed for development. And that then flows to sort of in it's an easterly direction and it heads towards Broomhill Cottage. My first question is whether that's correct. And linked to that, it's this question of the speed at which the SUDS operates. The pictures we got sent were of Broomhill Cottage, and they were literally the flooding was up to the wall of the cottage. So it's clearly at that point where any additional water being put into that system could be a problem. So what I'm really looking for is confirmation that that's the direction that the SUDS flows to, and also the question of how the SUDS work. I mean, I understand what you're saying about it being mimicking the natural, if you like, but I'm looking for reassurance that it's not going to, definitely not going to increase any flow in that direction, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. Just to clarify, you're correct in your understanding of where the outfall discharges to, which is a watercourse which is south of which runs sort of in a southeasterly direction, starting south of the plan that's shown on screen. This site is within the same sort of surface water catchment to that watercourse, so ultimately that's where the water ends up. So that's all been assessed as part of the overall assessment of the site. In terms of the assurance around how the sort of SUDS works, ultimately there's a control on the discharge from the pond into the pipe system, which ultimately discharges into the watercourse. That is a sort of set rate that mimics the natural runoff rate of the current development site within for a sort of design rainfall event. So basically it sets a rate that the natural ground wouldn't exceed. So sorry, just getting a message on the side distracted me. Ultimately, it's basically discharging at a rate that the site is will naturally generate runoff at, and this is controlled up to what we would term a 200-year rainfall event plus an allowance for climate change. So there's a significant volume of storage provided by the SUDS system, and the rate of discharge doesn't change whilst that's filling and storing the water on site. I'm not sure that's giving you much clarity.
Councillor Braun, you've got two questions. Can you do one at a time, please?
Thanks, convener. Let's get a question from Mr. Bissett again. May have touched on this already, but I noticed in the papers, in the online papers, the flood risk assessment is dated March 2021. That seems a long time ago not to have some form of update on it. Do we need an update on that? Bear in mind all the changes, climate change, whatever, and increased rainfall.
There's not been any. There's been ongoing discussion since the initial submission of that document around various aspects of it that have required clarity from ourselves, and so in terms of an update, there's not any sort of fundamental changes that are required. It was more questions around clarity in our consultation response.
Councillor Cuthbert, your next question.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, it's to do with contamination. I couldn't see a contamination report or a survey. Given that there was this tanker accident in 2012, I think it was, I'm just wondering why there wasn't a contamination survey and how much confidence we can have in that the site is actually clear of contamination now.
Paul, are you taking that one?
Yes, I'll certainly take it initially. Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. First and foremost, we did obviously consult with our contaminated land team as part of the proposals and with the wider knowledge of the previous accident which had occurred. Obviously, SEPA were the leading body on that and the remediation that was required, and they were ultimately satisfied with that aspect. And certainly, from the response that's been provided by contaminated land, they were satisfied that the necessary remediation work had been carried out, so didn't feel the need for any further reporting to take place.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you. Yes, it's really, I'm not sure it's for this committee, but having been down to the site and visited and looked around to see what's there, that it does strike me there's an awful lot of springs and water problems down there. So it's really a request that we can get someone from the flooding and team to go and have a look just to sort of see. I am concerned that the outflow from these properties might exceed the natural flow because it's going directly into the stream, if you like, that then goes down to Broomhill Cottage. But if we can find a solution that involves the landowner, that may resolve the issues down there.
I'm happy to take that one, obviously. A number of people from the flooding team have been in the Drum area to see a variety of sort of issues in that area. So we have been on the ground and understand the wider issues. I've got correspondence from yourself, Councillor Cuthbert, regarding sort of these wider issues and requests for meeting and things. So as you say, it is out with the scope of this committee sort of meeting, but we'll get a response to you on that around those wider issues.
Councillor James, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I suppose my question's kind of been asked already, and it's probably for Gavin Bissett. It's regarding, again, the flooding. I'm very, very conscious. I've seen the pictures and the laying water, if you like. And it's a question I wanted to ask the first deputation, which is regarding field drainage, which I've not long sold a field, which you have to maintain the drains to get it to, to keep the land dry. When they stop getting looked after, they block and it becomes flooded. With these houses potentially being built on top of what should be a drainage system on a bit of land, would that not make the problem even worse? And the other thing that I have a concern with, and this is happening everywhere, is that the sludge drains into the berm, which sort of traverses the bottom of the land. Who's responsible for the clearing of that burn or keeping it clear for water flow? Because we're getting an awful lot of these which are silting up. So is that part of the responsibility of this landowner? Sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor James. To answer the first part of your question, and what we've picked up from the deputations today as well, and through the objections through the planning process, the site itself currently has no drainage because the field drainage has been capped, and topsoil's also been removed. So that makes it much more susceptible to surface water ponding. There will be a wider field drainage system. I think the FRA, the flood risk assessment, picks that up and identifies that, and there is I think there is open channels as well that help drain some of that land. So in terms of the site sort of being built on top of an existing drainage system isn't necessarily the case, because the drainage system has been removed because of the contamination issue, that historic contamination issue, I should say, and there'll be a suitably designed drainage system that goes in to effectively ensure that site doesn't contribute surface water above the sort of pre-development rate. And when I'm talking about pre-development rate, I'm not talking about the rate that we're seeing just now, because that's not how it's calculated. I would assume a topsoil being in and things and having infiltration capacity and things. It's not the rapid surface water generation that currently is being reported. The second point around the receiving watercourse, ultimately landowners are responsible for any watercourse that passes through their land. So they're responsible for making sure they're maintained and also in a condition that doesn't give rise to flood risk. The council inspects watercourses, however, under a duty under the Flood Act. It's quite a vague duty in that we have to inspect watercourses within the council area from time to time, is how it's phrased in the legislation, but we have a schedule of varying frequencies for inspection. And if we have issues or identify issues through these inspections, we will first and foremost refer it to the landowner, and depending on the significance of that issue and the speed of the speed we would need some resolution, we can undertake clearance works ourselves. So that's where the sort of ownership and maintenance responsibilities lie with that.
Thank you very much. Really useful. Thanks.
Councillor Braun, you have another question?
Yeah, a very quick one, convener. We're going off back to Mr. Bissett again, I think, or maybe Mr. Williamson. One of the deputations, Mrs. Bray, I think it was, mentioned that there's a 40-metre pipe from her drainage system running under the ground with a herringbone soak-away system, 12 of them. Are we aware of those, and can we offer her some protection if the foundations are going in that could damage this system? We have to be by condition, I suppose. She didn't indicate where it's coming in.
Thank you. From the information obviously I heard from Mrs. Bray, the indication as I interpreted it was that the herringbone drainage system was out with the red line boundary of this site, albeit I would take from that it's within the applicant's ownership because they own the wider field. So that would ultimately be a civil consideration, but it doesn't appear to be affected by the development proposals.
Oh. Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, just going back to the SUD system again, I was just looking for some clarity on the SUD system. Will it be constructed to a Scottish Water adoptable standard? And what would be the process for Scottish Water to adopt that and maintain that SUD system thereafter?
Thank you, Bailey Williamson. Obviously, with it discharging into a watercourse, my understanding is that it would not be for Scottish Water adoption. Perhaps Gavin Bissett can clarify that aspect for me. But we do have a condition within the report that it has to be designed to the full standards that we would expect, and it has to be submitted to and approved by ourselves.
Yeah, just to add to what Paul just said there. Yeah, the ultimate control of that will come through the detailed drainage design condition that would be added to any approval of the application before you. It will be built up. It's designed to be higher than the Scottish Water standards because Scottish Water only require what we would call a 30-year rainfall event, whereas we're looking for a 200-year plus a climate change allowance design. So it's a higher standard, but there's other sort of various standards that need to be adhered to that we would adopt as well. In terms of the overall maintenance responsibility, again, that'll be ultimately finalised and clarified through the detailed design condition, but it's most likely to either remain private or it probably remain private, I would imagine, at this point.
Thank you, everyone. No further questions? No. I'll just put forward a motion for approval. I believe this complies with the Development Plan 2. I also believe that the conditions that have been put in place take account of the concerns raised within this application. Do you have a seconder? Bailey McLaren. You want to speak to it?
Just I would just happily second your motion, convener. I agree with your statements that the concerns have been addressed in the conditions, and as we've had previous applications of approval on this site, I think it's been well addressed. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any amendments? Councillor Braun.
Just a slight amendment, actually, convener. I'm a little bit concerned about this question of oil contamination in the ground, and I'm just wondering whether we could have a condition put in to have a contamination report carried out. I think we should err on the side of caution. People are going to be living there. I just wonder what colleagues think about that. But I think that I would like to see it done, but obviously it's the decision of others.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braun. Obviously, from the perspective of the consultation that we've undertaken, the advice of our professional officers is that a further report is not required. There was a further email which I've only just seen from Kirsty McKenzie's in Communities, which did flag that we could put an informative or condition on any future planning applications to get a reduced suite of sampling undertaken. But she did not consider that that would be warranted unless there was a significant change in the permitted levels or change in legislation that we have at this moment in time. So she was minded not to require anything further because she didn't see good reason to.
I think, Councillor Braun, I understand the sentiment, but bearing in mind the requirements imposed on planning authorities by the conditions circular, that any condition imposed has to be shown to be necessary. I think standing the expert advice to the committee from the information available, it would be difficult to say that such a condition would meet the necessity test here.
Happy with that, Mr. Vulcan and Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
We now have a second amendment, which will be the first amendment.
Sorry, I meant to second Bob Braun's amendment, but given the advice, I can't do that.
Okay, thank you. Right. So there are no amendments to this. Oh. Okay, then the application is approved subject to the conditions in the report of handling. Thank you. Right, we now move on to 523, the siting of 8 holiday accommodation units, erection of ancillary buildings, alterations and extension to an auxiliary buildings, formation of landscaping and paths, extension to car parking and associated works, Dunkeld House Hotel, Dunkeld. And this report will be introduced by Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, convener. The next application relates to the site within the wider grounds of the Category C listed Dunkeld House Hotel, which is a well-established and successful tourist destination, including the main hotel and facilities and an adjacent timeshare development. The application proposal seeks to integrate 8 holiday accommodation units together with ancillary infrastructure into a pocket of woodland, which forms part of a substantial landscape grounds, which are also included in the inventory of gardens and designed landscapes. The application follows on from 2 previous withdrawn submissions, which were for a larger number of units and also in light of the undertaking of an updated tree survey. I'll now take the committee through a short presentation to detail the proposals. Next slide, please. First, this aerial extract shows the site outlined in red and its wider relationship with the River Tay to the south, with A9 beyond, with Dunkeld sitting to the east. The wider site access is also to the east from the A923. Next slide, please. We now see the proposed site plan, with the development largely being contained within clearings in the existing woodland, or dell as it's referred to, a short distance to the north of the main hotel building. The layout shows the positioning of the 8 holiday units, which are spaced out and also utilise the varying topography. All proposed units are served via narrow access intended for pedestrians or small servicing vehicles, with guest parking being a short distance to the east and south. Next slide, please. The next plan shows a typical site section, which gives a greater indication of the fluctuating ground levels and wider treed landscape within which the units would be sited. Next slide, please. We now show both the elevations and floor plans of the intended holiday accommodations, which would be of a panel-built construction system. They would have a contemporary yet functional appearance, comprising large cladding, dark grey double glazed window units, and typically on stilts. Roofing would comprise a single ply membrane system. Of the 8 units proposed, 2 of them, and they are the westmost units, would be accessible units with level access. Next slide, please. This last plan shows the site in slightly more detail with plotted trees and intended routing to allow the crane to enter the site to deliver each unit to its intended location. Bog mats are proposed to minimise potential disturbance to the ground and tree root systems, as is the use of a screw pile system. I shall now share a few site photographs. Next slide, please. This aerial extract shows a slightly clearer image of the general relationship with the hotel and surrounding development, and illustrates that the existing woodland dell does contain areas of clearing within which the development is proposed. Next slide, please. This shows the general character of the site within the woodland and shows the undulating topography with existing path routing and bracken fern covered floor. Next slide, please. The next selection of photos are taken from earlier in the year with a more lush appearance, but illustrate how the site is well contained with mature trees and boundaries, with the top left photo looking back down towards the timeshare office and the others looking northeastwards into the far part of the dell. Next slide, please. In the top left, we now see the existing kennels, which would be demolished as part of the proposals, together with the existing path, which serves into the dell, while the bottom right photo shows the ancillary buildings close to the rear of the hotel. Next slide, please. This shows the view eastward from the access to the timeshare properties towards the rear car park and wider access road, which leads northwards past the application site and associated woodland to the C502 beyond. The aforementioned kennels can just be seen beyond the tree in the centre. Next slide, please. This last photo shows the view north from the junction at the northwestern corner of the hotel. Beside the timeshare lodge reception building, some of the additional proposed parking would be located beyond the existing path in the centre of the photo. Next slide, please. Thank you, convener. That now concludes the presentation, and I'll leave members with a proposed site plan for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. There are deputations for this application as well. I'll now hand over to convener to introduce the deputations. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Can I call Mr. Gunn, who's being supported with Mr. Dimmock? Good afternoon. You have 10 minutes to make your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes, so you could have a minute to sum up in your own time. I'll start the clock with you.
Convener, councillors, good afternoon. Okay. Right, I'll get the way. Thank you. Sorry about that. Ladies and gentlemen, I am chairman of the Dunkeld House Lodges Club, a very successful timeshare organisation that has provided economic benefit to the Dunkeld area for over 40 years. We have over 800 members, all of whom at some point in the year would be neighbours to the proposal. Of the 41 objections submitted, some are from our owners. Many others have requested that we object on their behalf. Our starting point is the planner's 2002 advice to the hotel after the last new buildings were approved within the grounds, stating that the capacity of the core landscape to absorb further major development has now been exhausted and further development is likely to be resisted. That statement has been a great source of comfort to our owners, particularly those buying in for the first time. So what has changed? We feel there are points within the planning officer's report that need to be challenged. Little mention is given to our timeshare properties and the impacts on owners. Some are just 50 metres away. A reference to holiday homes may give you the impression of property used only for part of the year. In actual fact, club lodges have full year-round occupancy. Parking spaces are proposed close to existing lodges. Parking in this area already causes congestion and disturbance. Use of the access road and its dangerous junction with the old A9 is not prevented or discouraged by the layout. So what of the site itself? It is one of Perthshire's surviving ancient woodlands within a designed landscape and a place of special interest. These places have enjoyed continuous woodland for more than 250 years and are heritage assets of rich biodiversity interest. That richness comes from a long and continuous period where tree and ground has not been disturbed. Your officer report simply states that the dell floor is covered in bracken. This omits to include the striking annual bloom of Scottish bluebells, mentioned in our submission and also those of the Community Council and the Woodland Trust. The dell and the bluebells will be decimated by the ground and building works proposed. The quiet ambience of the place, its natural and scenic qualities, will be obliterated and permanently lost. And what justifies this damage? It's a proposal which does not complement or contribute positively to the quality of the environment. Your planning policies require this. It does not examine alternative locations within the hotel grounds. It does not present a business case for development. Your policies require this. It does not detail any economic benefits and number of jobs to be created. Does not show hotel bookings are at capacity or there is a local shortfall of holiday accommodation. Your policy requires this. Does not claim that hotel viability will be threatened without development. Members, the scheme before you does not present sustainable planning. This special place is in your care and the development proposed is simply in the wrong place. The building should be seen as a last resort, not an opportunity to capitalise on a natural asset. Our concerns are shared by the Community Council, the Woodland Trust and many others. This application, in our view, should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Are you available for questions? Okay. Councillor Braun.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your deputation. I'm actually looking at the map on the screen there, and obviously when these properties go in, they will disturb the environment. But once in, nature has a way of reclaiming itself, and they would surely disappear into the landscape. Bluebells will come back, as they always do. So is it really a short-term problem? In due course, we will become part of the environment and disappear into the forestry ground with the bluebells coming back, and your concerns will be gone.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. I'd ask you to bear in mind that it's not just a nice picture with a little box on a hill that you should have in your head. There's a new access road going in. There's drains going in. There is lighting to the footpath network through lighting of the units themselves. If you have walked the site, this really is quite a unique and special environment. And I'm struggling to square that with the policy objective, planning policy, placemaking policy 1, which talks about development being compatible with its setting. So you're absolutely right. Nature will reclaim itself, but you'll have seen the quality of the grounds around the hotel, and they're all managed. What you have there is an ancient woodland with a different character, and it's that character which is going to be changed by this development.
There appears to be no further questions. Gentlemen, you're free to go. I will hand you back to the convener.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members for officers? Seems to be no questions at all. Can we move on then? Can I ask for a motion? I'll put forward a motion then that the application is approved. Don't wish to speak to it. I have a seconder for the motion. Councillor James, do you wish to speak?
Sorry, convener. My laptop must be getting very tired because it wouldn't allow me to put anything in. Yeah, quite happy to second. Well, when I say quite happy, this is in my ward, and we have to look at everything with planning considerations, and with the report that we've got before us and looking at the evidence, there's nothing that we would that we could use to actually turn this application down. I agree with Councillor Braun that as far as footprints go, minimal footprints, and it's not 8 houses. Basically, there are 8 rooms with a living area in it. So it's not like full family homes and supplementary to the hotel. So on this occasion, I would be happy to second your motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask if there's an amendment? No amendment. The application is approved, subject to conditions in the report of handling. Thank you. We now go on to the PAN's proposal of application notices. This is for an installation of a battery storage facility comprising battery storage units and associated works, land 100 metres southwest of Birch Grove, Kilahoonan. And I had to get that wrong. Kilahoonan. There you go. Any comments on this report? On this PAN? None. Oh, there is. Coming in now. Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, I've got a number of comments. Shall I just go through them?
Yes, please.
Go through them. One of them is around about traffic management during construction. Just to remind officers that the B8019, if there is any additional wide loads going up that road, you'll need a police escort. The building next door to it is Rannoch Power Station, which I understand is a listed building. And I was just wondering if there are any associated buildings to be constructed next to that, where they would actually complement that listed building status. The security of the site is sat actually next to a Perth and Kinross car park, where there's a number of motorhomes and wild campers go there throughout the summer. So it's just about making sure there is sufficient security at that site. And light pollution, just to be aware of that. And finally, try and restrict the hours of construction, because any noise emitted from that site will be echoing right the way across the loch, not just around about Kilahoonan.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Sorry, Convener, I wasn't quick enough. Bailey Williamson has actually highlighted a couple of points that I would have raised, and I'm so glad that you had to pronounce the place name, because I wouldn't have even attempted it. So thank you.